Good evening. My name is Noah Salsic, and I'm a student project manager for the Clark Forum for Contemporary Issues at Dickinson College. I would like to first acknowledge that Dickinson College is in the unceded lands of the Susquehannock Nation. We acknowledge the many indigenous peoples that live with these lands, as well as the thousands of indigenous children forced into the Carlisle Industrial Indian School starting in 1879 as part of a federal cultural eradication effort. On behalf of the Clark Forum, Dickinson College, the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples, the Center for Sustainability Education, and the Departments of Russian, Environmental Studies, and Theater and Dance, I'd like to take a moment to welcome you all to tonight's event, Sliding Earth, Arctic Indigenous Cryo-Worlds, Environmental Risks and Human-Non-Human Collaboration. This event is part of the Clark Forum semester theme, the Arctic, as well as the Leadership in an Age of Uncertainty series. Tonight's program will feature a lecture by Dr. Olga Ulturgasheva, followed by performances from Ebony Melody, a collection of 4 dances from the Ballet, choreographed by Sayan Ulturgashev. As an environmental studies major myself, my classes have only begun to scratch the surface when talking about climate change. We discuss the present models and predictions the scientific community makes, but naturally these are imperfect. It can be challenging for the scientific community to translate data into information that's legible for the wider world, and reports on a warming planet are important, but it's hard for us to know what's going to happen in the future exactly. Our world is clearly changing before our eyes, and we need to cope with current realities. It's important that tonight's speaker educate us on this process. I hope to leave tonight's event with a better understanding of how indigenous communities cope with climate change and what can be done in the here and now. Research shows that the Arctic is warming at a rate 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the world, placing extreme strain on the ecosystems of the cryosphere, which is the ice-dependent communities and ecosystems of the Arctic. This rapid warming causes feedback loops as the Arctic loses its sea ice and permafrost covering, thus exposing more land that absorbs more heat, furthering the process. Sea ice and permafrost are essential to the climate of the world and the Arctic, as well as the lives of indigenous communities. Reindeer herding, hunting, and travel are all just a few aspects of Arctic life that are threatened by a rapidly changing climate. Olga Ulturgasheva is currently a senior lecturer of social anthropology at the University of Manchester, a Pathy visiting professor at Princeton, and an author of 3 books. Her research includes ethnographic studies on reindeer herding, nomadic cosmologies, and climate transformations in the Arctic. She's also the acting principal investigator for 2 international collaborative research projects funded by both the U.S. National Science Foundation and European Research Council. Sayan Ulturgashev is an indigenous ballet dancer and choreographer from Siberia. He is a principal dancer for the Yaktuk Ballet Theater and would later become a coach before emigrating to the UK. He has taught at schools and colleges around the UK and Siberia, and has held principal roles in Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella, and The Nutcracker, among many others. His work is inspired by indigenous Siberian art forms and combines elements of Arctic indigenous dance styles with traditional ballet techniques. There will be a question and answer session immediately following the program, so please hold all questions until then. For students who are interested in participating in the Passport program, scan the QR code at the back of your program to track your attendance through Engaged. For more information on this Passport program, take a passport with you as you exit the auditorium. The Clark Forum welcomes differences of opinion expressed politely, thoughtfully, and succinctly. Disruptive behavior or harassment of the speaker, performers, members of the Dickens community, or audience members will not be tolerated. As a show of respect for our speaker and everyone in attendance, please stay until the end of the program, which includes the question and answer session. At the end of the emergency, in the event of an emergency, please note that accessible exits are located on the west side of this building. Out of respect for our speaker and the performers, no photos or videos are allowed to be taken during tonight's event. At this time, I ask that you silence all cell phones and electronic devices. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Olga Ulturgasheva.
Good evening, everyone. What a huge honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to present for such an important and exciting series of public talks devoted to contemporary issues around the world. I'm so glad to see that the fall semester at Dickinson College focuses on the theme of the Arctic, and I'm really honored that this particular lecture opens the series of Arctic-related events. This lecture is also special because it is combined with the ballet performance. I think when climate science and art work together, the impact only accelerates, and the jointly produced message generates much more powerful affect. So today I shall speak about climate change, particularly how fast the Arctic climate and environment are changing now. The speed with which the region has been lately changing is dramatic and quite unsettling. If in the dominant discourse, the Arctic has often been associated with the cold, empty, pristine, and liminal, sparsely populated resource frontier, nowadays, reports on climate change, global warming, are transforming this mainstream perception of the region from a remote, uninhabited area into a territory of crucial environmental and geopolitical importance. The Arctic as an eco-zone rather than as an eco-military zone has suddenly become visible and as tangible and very fragile. This transformation of the public discourse and perception of the region, albeit very slow, indicates that it is no longer easy to ignore the fact that the Arctic is changing at an accelerated rate, and global feedbacks to its transformations are emerging through a cluster of environmental disasters simultaneously happening across all continents. Although climate modeling foresaw such phenomena as Arctic amplification a decade ago, polar climate models have consistently underestimated the speed with which the warming has intensified since then. The narratives and stories of dramatic change offered by the indigenous inhabitants of the Arctic and international climate scientists are ceaselessly pointing to a profound sense of unpredictability and uncertainty generated by the change. These are the reports of the unprecedented extinction rate of animals, birds, insects, and plants, whose livelihoods have relied on the fragile ecology of the cryosphere. A melting cryosphere accelerates the likelihood for thousands of towns and villages located along the Arctic coastline to be threatened by rising sea levels and loss of the sea ice. The current reports on dramatic environmental changes that includes wildfires that have been ravaging a huge territory of subarctic forests over the last 3 summers in a row, severe floods destroying human settlements across the Arctic, provided by indigenous communities, portend grim scenarios of environmental futures worldwide. And the startling dynamic of the recent coastal floods, particularly in Alaska, as you remember from international media news, how all this scary news about the floods have been reported. All of that clearly indicates that the Arctic cryosphere is disappearing, and there is an urgent need in novel forms of engagement with complex impacts of climate change. If we look at the summer reports on Alaskan and Siberian wildfires over the last 2 years, the systemic impact of permafrost thaw and the effects of COVID pandemic on top of all of these, we can speak of the severe propagation of risks and uncertainties across the region, making an already fragile cryosphere even more fragile while turning the region into a hotspot of emergencies. The regime of runoff pressure producing cascades of linkages indicates that responses to permafrost thaw are multidirectional, with simultaneous effects across human and non-human domains. These effects are threatening to generate all sorts of hindrances for the governance of disaster preparedness, significantly reducing human capacity for survival and resilience. The dynamic which I am describing here has been associated with the notion of Anthropocene. And probably, as most of you know, Anthropocene is an era of severe environmental destruction continuously induced by a corporate system's voracious appetite for endless expansion and accumulation of wealth at the expense of natural resources and fragile ecosystems. So all of these discussions have been part of the debates revolving around human impact on ecologies around the world. However, the notion of the Anthropocene and its time scale may not sound sufficiently alarming in indicating the extreme urgency and high run of pressure that will push all sectors of societies, especially military and medical services, to get involved with more and more rescue and relief operations, stretching budgets and interfering with their emergency capabilities. Arctic is being threatened by complete loss and disappearance of the cryosphere, or as I call it, cryosite. Cryosite could be compared with a ticking time bomb, the effects of which will not stay solely in cryospheric regions. The impacts will accelerate the emergence of new risks, all of which have the potential of going literally viral. As the latest pandemic of COVID-19 has shown, the scale for the new viral may exceed human cognitive and infrastructural capacities to contain the onset of new risks. Moreover, the new risks will turn out to be an old type of risks or dormant ones. What is clear is that carbon dioxide is not the only risk stored in the layers of permafrost. Permafrost has always been an ancient refrigerator for the remains of life that once thrived in the Arctic, including microbes, pathogens, viruses, ancient plankton, insects, and amphibia. After being frozen, these ancient species have never completely disappeared, and it is likely that continuous permafrost thaw will soon offer them a chance for a second life. The prospects for various frozen creatures that hibernated in permafrost to re-enter this world are getting higher, and this includes the possibility for zombie viruses now hidden in the subsurface ground to re-emerge. For decades, the continuous activity of extractive industries has been steadily driving environmental disasters and ruining regional landscapes and ecologies. Billions of tons of carbon dioxide coming from fossil fuels that continue to enter the atmosphere annually are amplifying the dynamic of ecological reunation. The regional histories of industrial development, whether it is Alaska, Siberia, Greenland, Canada, or Fennoscandia, have often illustrated that permafrost-bound lands, after decades of intensive mining and extraction, are damaged irreversibly. Neither monetary compensation nor new technologies for regeneration, habitat restoration, recreation, or recultivation will be sufficiently effective in returning this landscape to ecological health, much less to an earlier state. So, in my view, this particularly applies to a revivalist project called Pleistocene Park, undertaken by Russian scientists. This dystopian park was established 4 miles away from the town of Chersky in northeast Siberia in 2018. The project implementers believe that by populating a stretch of 60 square miles with genetically engineered beasts that are a cross between elephants and woolly mammoths, as well as yaks, horses, sheep, and oxen. They will revive the grassland spread as it was during the Pleistocene era, that glacial geological period that ended 12,000 years ago. Reversing that process and reviving the grasslands, they argue, could be the key to preserving permafrost. The plan to reintroduce large mammals that could tamp down moss, knock down trees, and churn up the soil is meant to allow the grass to flourish again. In this romanticized view of the Pleistocene era, the grass had a capacity to reflect sunlight and capture more carbon in its roots than today's flora. By reintroducing and reoccupying the area with long-gone mammals, the project, which requires roughly 3,000 animals and $114 million of investment, hopes to slow down the degradation of permafrost and keep the Siberian tundra and taiga frozen. The project may be provocative and costly thought experiment, but just like any technological fix, this looks too simple for a wickedly complex problem. What is extremely important to understand that environmental transformations on a geological epoch scale can never be confined to one isolated activity, such as the grazing habits of large mammals, and intervene with hooves, large mammals with hooves. One must recognize that myriad other factors influenced and intervened in the course of environmental change. Factors that include such disruptions as the multiple forms of development, including industrial development, that change the chemical and organic composition of the soil, flora and fauna, irreversibly. What is missing in this revivalist hype surrounding Pleistocene Park is the voice of Siberian indigenous populations, who have been living in this era for eons, and who have never been consulted on how this type of quite ambitious dystopian endeavor unfolding in front of their eyes could impact their livelihoods and sense of security. Nor were they asked how these newly introduced animals might affect either the population of their herds of the domesticated reindeer or the hunted animals upon which they heavily depend. Would those genetically revived animals compete for the areas of habitation and organize the reindeer pastures vital for the indigenous community's well-being and their continuation? Would all these regenerational activities take place at the expense of their own lives and the lives of their future generations? As the Arctic Indigenous accounts have shown before, there is a world of difference between approaching the permafrost-bound land as a resource to be preserved and approaching the permafrost as a sentient, animate being. Geopolitically, with the dramatic disappearance of the cryo-worlds, the region is likely to turn into a major point of volatility in the territorial disputes and resource conflicts between nation-states and corporations. One cannot escape foreseeing the prospects for a militarized future in the Arctic. As the ice is melting away, drilling for gas and oil is intensifying, and new shipping routes are opening, along with the recognition that the protection of national and corporate interests will be hard to maintain, as they are neither adequately equipped nor properly aware of the nature of risks in a new and unfamiliar Arctic. Although ice melt and the rising waters emerged as major risks several decades ago, there is still no comprehensive plan of what to do about it infrastructurally, politically, economically, and ideologically. It is not only an environmental crisis, it is the crisis of knowledge. As the new epistemological and political tools which are needed for engaging properly, properly responding to and dealing with the entire crisis are simply lacking. What is becoming increasingly obvious in the light of the latest developments is the ice-free Arctic is turning into reality faster than we expected. Risks associated with the melting cryosphere and rapidly disappearing ocean and land ice have important implications for the understanding human responses to climate change. The process of thaw, or melt, offers a conceptual grid for capturing the dynamic of the latest environmental changes in the Arctic. Such cryoformations as glaciers, permafrost, icebergs, and snowdrifts, which are rapidly disappearing, highlight the crucial roles they have been playing in contributing to the continuation of diversity and multiplicity of lives and worlds, including that of humans. Conceptually, the changes that are associated with the transition from one form to another, when a solid, well-shaped entity such as ice turns into formless fluid substance, creates the effects of dissolution, transformability, and the ability to quickly change following the flow of changes. My further discussion will illustrate that the patterns of adaptability and human capacity to survive and cope with environmental changes depends very much on the ability to follow the flow and anticipate the changes in advance. You shall see that the people's accounts of environmental risks exemplify the extent to which cosmological, geological, and social processes are entangled. They cannot be viewed separately, as in that Places in Park project, where those woolly mammoths are just set aside as if humans do not exist anymore around. So all of that entanglement should be always taken in account in any project, whether it is natural scientist project or social scientist project. They highlight that what is currently being damaged, and these are the ice-dependent worlds of non-humans upon which indigenous communities depend. So now let's examine the ways Siberian Avena reindeer herders, and I'm speaking about the area, you probably see that blue spots right on the right corner next to Arctic. So I'll be speaking about this particular area. And particularly Siberian Avena reindeer herders and the way they perceive, experience, and articulate the latest dynamic of climate change and what factors challenge their safety. The area populated by Siberian Avena reindeer herders is annually affected by detrimental effects of cryogenic changes, having significant impact on their sense of security. Every year, Siberia loses several kilometers of land as it erodes, either slowly turning into post-cryogenic, unlivable lands, disappearing under the mud waters of melting permafrost, or encroaching ocean waters in coastal areas of the Siberian Arctic waters. Siberian Arctic. Melting permafrost causes annual emergency situations that include breakdown of roads and bridges, collapse of residential and industrial buildings. Particularly vulnerable rural areas experience systemic infrastructural failures that require relocation of entire villages. And you probably saw how in Alaska, the community of Hooper Bay, where I conducted research, has been heavily affected. There are floods that literally, ended up in the ocean, floating in the ocean. Melting ice grounds also trigger flash floods and landslides, which then prompt snow avalanches in the mountain areas. And the chain of co-implications continues in multiple and unpredictable directions. Around the area where Avena live, move, and herds their reindeer, the latest environmental dynamic is manifested in a flux of cryospheric transformations. The sense of entanglement with which transformations unfold is getting more and more pervasive, as one environmental disaster drives a sequence of other destructive events, the impact of which proliferates erratically in all possible directions. Therefore, the directions the changes take become increasingly hard to predict by locals. In order to illustrate the ways Avena survive and cope with environmental risks, let's look at the event of the landslide that happened as a result of rapidly thawing permafrost. Can I have the video of landslide switch on, please? Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Could you please return to the previous slide? So what you have seen actually has happened right in the middle of the summer night when people were asleep, and they were caught totally by surprise. So, and one of the reindeer herders took his mobile camera and started shooting. So, and as you can see, people didn't expect the slide light to happen at all. So, using a mobile phone camera, a reindeer herder managed to video record how a geyser of muddy water flashed out of the dry ground. It looked as if a subterranean river came out suddenly after being pushed up by thawing permafrost. The video captures how people are trying to flee the flooded area to safety hurriedly, yet calmly. People are moving fast, but nobody is panicking and screaming out in fear. So, and that was, I thought, was pretty kind of obvious when I saw that they're calm but very fast. So local Aveni used the term Batan Mon while referring to the landslide. In translation from Aveni language, Batan Mon is translated as water coming out of moving or sliding earth. This is the most dangerous and destructive type of mud flow, which happens when surface freshwaters are infiltrated by surface waters. Subsurface and surface waters are antagonistic type of waters, which in the event of infiltrating the other, tend to erupt with the mud flow. So according to Aveni reindeer herders, Batan Mon usually occurs in the area characterized by accumulation of rocks. If in the past the scale of eruption was more or less bearable, and people expected Batan Mon to erupt sometime around the first 2 months of summer, these days the timing for Batan Mon has shifted to a month later, and instead of eruptive flash flood, the earth explodes with this type of the landslides. So indeed, the earth is sliding now. It is obvious that the stone layer of the area has been destabilized by an unusual amount of precipitation and by shifts in internal ice formations affected by warming of internal temperature regime. So apart from overwhelming amount of precipitation, which actually has been quite prevalent these days, reindeer herders attribute changing nature of eruptive floods to the impact of forest fires, the impact of which is non-linear and multidirectional. Reindeer herders are particularly devastated to see how the pastures rich in lichen are being quickly destroyed by the wildfires. The fire destroys the layer that is hosting complex root system branching in the soil. Acting as a natural shield for the internal frozen grounds, these woven branching roots protect permafrost from degradation. Alongside with the roots and branches, fire destroys the most valuable protective layer that mainly consists of lichen. The lichen layer plays equally important role as it safeguards temperature regime of the entire ground ecosystem. If wildfire reaches the bogs, then the scale of its destructive impact goes significantly up. Bogs have always been crucial for maintenance of an ecosystem necessary for the growth of lichen. Lichen is valued by reindeer herders not only for its protective layer, but also for its equally important nurturing power, as it remains to be the main element of the reindeer diet. Unsurprisingly, reindeer pastures are located around bogs, and reindeer herders choose to organize their camps not too far from their herds of reindeer. Bogs, though, are highly flammable. And as one match dropped accidentally may cause wildfire that can spread very quickly, almost like gunpowder. Therefore, reindeer pastures can be destroyed within minutes. Since bogs are being destroyed by wildfire, the ecosystem necessary for lichen is also being ruined. But the bog fire has a potential for even larger destructive impact, as it may burn relentlessly underneath the ground, continuously accelerating the speed of permafrost degradation. So the nature fires also have changed, because now it can burn below the grounds, inside the permafrost. Hence, disappearance of protective layer of lichen intensifies instability of an already shaky and movable surface consisted of marshy holes and ravines. While lichen has always been a vital element of reindeer diet, it also holds a central place in what Aveni call bilek, a web of mercifulness, in which each element remains to be at the mercy of another element. According to an elder of the village of Topoline, Nikolai Nevstroyev, the notion of bilek implies that humans have always remained at the mercy of wild and semi-domesticated reindeer. Reindeer have been at the mercy of lichen, which in turn has been at the mercy of the land, which has stayed solid owing to mercifulness of lichen. Since all elements in this human-non-human community have been bound by interreliance, their safety and continuation are determined by a symmetrical network of merciful dependence. Extinction of such an important element and crucial environmental variable as lichen will only speed up permafrost thaw, leading to the rapid onset disaster scenarios such as catastrophic floods, followed by emergency evacuations of the affected populations. In response to the dramatic changes, reindeer herders are building on their own skills and knowledge, highlighting an even more increasing importance of a mobile lifestyle. And it happened in the complete absence of support from the state. So they are completely left on their own. There are any sort of welfare system that will help and fund any sort of evacuation. So they have to do everything on their own. Maintaining mobility is a vital element of their toolbox of skills, centered on mobility and flexibility. One of the features that characterize the Aveni technique of survival has been always special emphasis on lightness of their material technologies and mobile infrastructure. As you can see on the photos, they are very mobile precisely because reindeer is extremely mobile animal, and this highly mobile animal is used as a transportation means. The lightness of tents, lightness of luggage and belongings, and preparedness to move instantly has assured that people had more chances to survive and stay safe in the taiga, in the forest. Mobility, specifically movement with their domestic reindeer, has been a predominant framework through which Aveni experience and understand the world, and central component of their livelihoods, which revolves around seasonal cycle of reindeer migration. Reindeer, sledges, tents, and skis have been the core aspects of their lives. And the idea of moving along one's family migration route is meaningful to both Aveni living in a reindeer herding camp in the forest and those living in small villages or urban centers. So that mobility patterns remains with them wherever they are. Even with me, I'm moving around continents, so it actually helps me to survive too. So difficulties in getting from the stationary settlements to the reindeer herding camps and pastures, and vice versa, continues to condition logistical and psychological preparedness for risky situations. As one Aveni reindeer herder told me, quote, "You have to travel lightly, but make sure you bring all necessary stuff yourself. The people who are able to survive are the ones who move between camps a lot and always have a tent, a bunch of ropes, variety of light bags, a reindeer skin mat to sleep on, kettle, tea, drinking mugs, axe, knife, and a box of matches. All of that has to be neatly organized so that you can pack your stuff within seconds." Such emphasis on lightness, constant alertness, organization of things inside the tent, and readiness to flee the onset of disaster have been shaped in response to the need to to escape environmental dangers, including floods, landslides, and forest fires on time. Although, as you have seen on the video, they were completely caught by surprise. So although the strategy works, but at times it is becoming increasingly hard to prevent and predict this type of disasters. So what we can learn from Aveni ways of dealing with recent environmental changes is that logistical and infrastructural arrangements centered on mobility are enabled by a state of mind that assumes the necessity for flexibility and anticipation. This is accompanied by the need for recognizing individual expertise, including an expertise of a child. Everyone is responsible for the continuous observations and reporting on changes of behavior of reindeer, birds, insects, and the condition of plants, as well as color of clouds. Not only knowledge, but a readiness to share this knowledge prepares every reindeer herder to strategize accordingly. So the question is about the access of knowledge is very much about, some flaws of the system too, when, access to knowledge is locked behind huge fees, for university. So when knowledge becomes expensive and inaccessible, this is where survival and resilience is diminished significantly. Okay, so here we're dealing with slightly different pattern of sharing, significantly different pattern of sharing the knowledge. Such constant awareness provides a space and time for the development of preemptive techniques. Aveni combine this set of anticipative tactics to generate a temporal gap which they can utilize in order to quickly devise an appropriate strategy for dealing with forthcoming disaster and retain flexibility in the face of increasing environmental uncertainty. This Siberian account of human adaptive agency highlights the capacity to stay attuned to all elements of the web of mercifulness that I discussed. The geomorphological features of permafrost and their animate manifestation are part of this web, or Ballet. They only accentuate, all these features of Ballet, accentuate that the web requires recognition of permeability, interconnectedness, and mutual reliance of human and non-human life forms. For reindeer herders, the permafrost-bound land has always been a complex and dynamic interconnected ecology, highly sensitive to any environmental pressures, including the ones induced by climate change. Their outlook is neither human-centric nor exclusively centered on non-human or extra-human, as equal attention to both have been crucial for devising preemptive strategies and effective responses. Thank you so much for your attention. So it's time for questions, right? Yeah.
We're going to do questions after. Now we're proud to present the world premiere of excerpts from Sayan, Ulturgashev, Aveni Melody, a collection of 4 dances from the Ballet Idjik. Before the performance begins, I'd like to welcome Sayan Ulturgashev to the stage to share more information about how the performance you're about to see and tell the work about this production.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sayan Ulturgashev, as already introduced. I am indigenous classical ballet dancer and choreographer. And it has been my huge honor to prepare and work together with the Dickinson College on this special event. The ballet piece called A Veni Melody. That will be performed in front of you right now. This event is special not only for Dickinson College, but for all Siberian indigenous artists, and especially for our native Aveni people communities. The entire project was completed in collaboration with indigenous artists and singers from Siberian Aveni community, and you saw them in the reindeer. The indigenous artists designed the costume for each dancer. You'll see them really beautiful, individually. The songs were performed by Siberian Aveni community members upon my request. I asked them to make that music and make that song, especially for this performance. We, indigenous artists, worked together with the director of Dickinson Ballet Program, Sarah Skag. Yep. And, thank you. And the amazing person, stagecraft expert, Sherry McCombs. Yeah. Yeah, and everyone who were involved in the production. Thank you. Especially with brilliant students who worked very hard over the last months to make sure the ballet performance happens tonight. The hard work is an act of solidarity with Siberian indigenous communities who suffered colonial violence and oppression for centuries. The silent genocide committed against them continues today. And the very fact that the performance, whom I personally auditioned them, interview them, and invite them to the dance in this ballet, are the students of Dickinson College, is very much a powerful expression of their support for all indigenous people around the world, indigenous arts and creativity. So I really hope that tonight you'll support them with the strongest and generous applause. The hard work and dedication deserve as much support as possible. Thank you. Thank you all, and please enjoy the performance.
cái gì dạy mình nói dân nghe nó dạy cứ cái gì dạy cứ cái gì dạy bắt ta xem ngỡ cái này phải chắc cái tảng cái cứ cái gì dạy cứ cái gì dạy cứ cái gì dạy
dolama şiurdan Ulturgashev okina Yerize Rusi İkelkanadam Ayike Anodake Udikadar Jamu Yagalengadudan Sebdelişhudan
Namalli Nanai Puki de Len Nanai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai
Aike no dake okina mel chalan eruse merjun jekte ingenedam tienida ali marchaka
Puki de Len Nanai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai Gugaji Jai Jai
Gonam mawo de gun gonam mawo de gun hilning kan meden wajal khai
will now begin the question and answer portion of tonight's event, so please stick around if you can. Because this event is being recorded, please raise your hand and wait for a microphone to reach you prior to asking your question. The first question is reserved for students, after which point we will open it up to the rest of the audience. So we are now looking for a student question. If there are no student questions, we can now open it up to the rest of the audience. And these can be questions for either of our speakers.
Thank you. I'd like to refer to the videos of the flash floods in Siberia. Throughout those videos, the scenes are just teeming with insect life. There are insects swarming all over the place. Does that happen all the time, or is that just with respect to the flash floods, and do we know what kind of insects they are?
Well, those mosquitoes are everywhere in Siberian taiga. If you ever been there, you will be incessantly, disturbed by their bites, But as far as you are absolutely right. But at the time of the landslide, the number of mosquitoes increases because some of the insects actually find refuge in the lichen and the surface grounds of the permafrost-bound land. So, and they do come out of under the ground. So, and it seems like because they look very black, and rather than the ones that usually stay in the air, so it means they actually come out from outside of the earth. So inside of the earth, yes.
Thank you. So I have very limited knowledge of the Ebony people, but I have a sense that they are people of the light and the people of the reindeer. And I saw the dancers. I mean, what came to my mind was the hoofs of reindeer. So I wonder if Sayan or the dancers or Olga can speak to the indigenous dancing and the ways in which that might represent, in part, the reindeer.
Sayan may answer, but I can start actually. This lightness, yes, absolutely. Reindeer is extremely mobile dance, and as you can actually see, this Sayan wanted to reproduce in his choreography this amazing mobile assemblage of human and reindeer. But moreover, it's not just human and reindeer; it's also spiritual that maintains connection between animals and living beings. And that spirit can turn quickly into a reindeer, or can quickly become an insect or tree. And those, as you saw, the dance called the jerk is about these transformations and capacity to form into a different form.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. And the reindeer part and hooves and all parts is really important because they represent some pieces of not just the world, that's kind of a cosmological meaning. Because the hooves and antlers, they're made from the same material, but they're different. So hooves, how you touch the land, and from hooves you make you heard some sound in some of the music. So they have music of, there was sound of dried hoofs go shing, shing, shing, shing. And the antlers, the reindeer was changing antlers. They're like a season of the year. And so every year the antlers go up and down. And so when we use a lot in the dance, but in this small kind of a small performance, so we just represent them by hands. Otherwise, we can make a big, it depends of the performance, but we use them a lot. Yes, thank you.
I have a question for Olga. You had a picture of a very diverse lichen community. I think it was called Ballet?
Ballet, yeah.
Ballet? And you used an interesting term, mercifulness. My instinct was to use symbiosis there. Tell me about your word choice there, the mercifulness of that relationship between that community.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yes, I was really looking for some time for the right term in English, translate the sense of bilag, because bilag is quite a complex term. It can denote life, but this life, a particular life, it's a life that depends very much on other types of lives, So, and this mercifulness evokes the sense of how non-human-centric cosmology of a reindeer herders is. Man is not in the center of the universe. It is actually, if man is there, but his position or her position is only because of the mercifulness of all other elements. So it actually produces quite well the symmetry of human, non-human forms and non-hierarchical nature of relations. So, and I think because since you are at the mercy, you will never can be cruel, or you can never go beyond the or exceed the limit that you are given by that web of mercifulness. And if something goes out, it means mercy will not ever happen, The permafrost-bound land can explode with a landslide. That is why the title for the talk was Sliding Earth. It means it's also the earth that is sliding out of the web of mercifulness. Okay, thank you.
Hello, so this one will be a question for Dr. Olga. So what role, if any, does natural gas extraction or oil extraction in Siberia done in Russia, what role, if any, does that have to do with ecological destruction there, and how does that impact indigenous populations there, especially in context of the effects we're seeing from climate change?
The impact is, of course, huge. Because over the last 10 years, what's happened with the Putin regime and his oligarchic type of kleptocratic regime, what has happened is like all these corporations that are predatory corporations that are greedy to and aspired to make profit very quickly turned up there as like mushrooms, So now, if, for example, 20 years ago, we would hardly see any gold mining companies. Now, every single, I think, 50 kilometers, you can actually see that they are mining a lot. And it has happened over the last 5 years. In the area of reindeer herders now, there are several communities who actually complain to me directly, saying that there are gold miners who turned up there without anyone's permission, but the permission comes from the state. There is no permission from the community, but the actual state sanctions this type of predatory activity. So it means that the permafrost, more than ever, is fragile, and this web of mercifulness can be destroyed any minute. So it's just extremely sad and tragic dynamic that is happening now. We don't know what will happen, but it seems like with this geopolitical situation, with the war in Ukraine, everything is getting worse and worse, So I'm not sure what to say, but as you see, reindeer herders do not give up. They still adapt, they try to be there. And of course, their capacity is limited. But what we can learn from them is their resilience and their understanding that that human potential has got no limits, and you can actually endure and survive. But of course, it is all being questioned heavily by this destructive dynamic of climate change, but also anthropogenic processes like mining and extractive industries. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Hello. So you mentioned that reindeer herders are adapting to the cryo side in your presentation. And so I'm wondering, are there any indigenous organizations trying to deal with the cryo side? Are there any like international environmental organizations that are invested in this?
Yes, of course. There were international organizations, and they were alongside this destructive mining activity that has been, destroying the environment. There were so many international NGOs that have turned up to protect the land, but because of this boycotting of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the activity of international NGOs is not possible now. They are simply not allowed to enter the country. So everything was happening before that invasion. And these days, now, nobody knows what's happening there. But what is happening there is that cryocide is ongoing. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have good news for this question.
This concludes our program for tonight, so please join me in giving a huge thank you to both of our speakers, all of the performers, and everyone who made tonight possible.